Welcome to See You on the Other Side, where the world of the mysterious collides with the world of entertainment. A discussion of art, music, movies, spirituality, the weird, and self-discovery. And now, your hosts, musicians and entertainers who have their own weakness for the weird, Mike and Wendy from the band Sunspot.
Friday the 13th this year was lucky in Madison for the people that came to the Wonders of the Invisible World release party.
All three of us were there.
Yes, that's right. Oh. And that is an album of songs based on songs we've created for the See You on the Other Side podcast. You can find more information on how to get a copy of that album for yourself in the show notes for this othersidepodcast.com/193. But Friday the 13th was unlucky this year for all of us who love paranormal radio.
Yeah. We had no idea while we were,
celebrating
at the album release that somebody that has been very important to us over the years was dying.
Yes. And so Art Bell, the man who gave us Coast to Coast AM and countless hours of entertainment, as well as thought-provoking topics, he passed away at the age of 72.
Yeah.
On April 13th. He was in Pahrump, Nevada.
Yep. His home in Pahrump, yep.
In Pahrump, in Nye County. And so they always had that deep voice that said, "From the Kingdom of Nye." And that's Art would be in the Kingdom of Nye. He was in his trailer as he, let's go back and talk about Art Bell a little bit real quick for those of you guys who aren't familiar. This is our Art Bell tribute show. And so we're going to talk about the man who inspired a lot of us to talk about these strange topics and who really set the standard for paranormal talk radio. I mean, Art Bell's Coast to Coast AM, started in the late 80s, and it didn't start getting into weird topics until the early 90s. And I remember Allison, our mother, talking about Art Bell because she would stay up all night and listen to the radio. She used to listen. Larry King, that was his. He used to have a nighttime radio show. She listened to that. And
right.
once Larry King retired and went to just doing TV stuff and got off the radio, she was looking for something else to listen to in the middle of the night. And she'd be like, well, there's this guy named Art Bell, and he just talks about weird stuff.
So it's kind of like, as you're talking about this, Mike, it's very revealing about our childhood and what a freak our mother totally is. She's like, you're like, she was up all night.
That's right. Well, that's what she did. I mean, she was a night owl.
Yes.
And still is.
Yes.
Right?
Oh, yeah. She'll still be up late. And some people are just night people and some people are morning people.
Right. And, it's really a nasty rumor that we're a family of vampires. That's not true at all. There's no evidence whatsoever.
Allison's a vegan vampire, right? You just suck plants' blood?
That's right. I'm like
chlorophyll.
Bunnicula.
She sucks chlorophyll.
Oh, right. She's a chlorophyll vampire.
She hungers for the taste of chlorophyll.
Did you guys ever read the Bunnicula books?
That's what I was just saying, but I'm just like Bunnicula. Actually, I teach 4th grade, so my teaching partner has read the book Bunnicula. I can't stomach it, to tell you the truth. But we did go see the play.
Is it about a bunny?
It's about a vampiric bunny
who is
essentially, he just likes juice. He's a juicer, right?
Yeah.
That sounds really boring.
He's like Jack LaLanne's juice tiger.
So I remember there was a Bunnicula not after school special. It was like a Saturday morning special when we were kids, Wendy. And then so there's a Bunnicula, and then there was the sequel which I had read. I'd actually owned the sequel, The Celery Stalks at Midnight, and that's about Bunnicula's victims coming back to life. And that's appropriate because we're talking about Art Bell because Art Bell's show started here at midnight. Till 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yes.
And I'd say starting when I became a night owl, which was in college, Coast to Coast is what I went to sleep every night. And then I'd wake up and hear the pig futures. For real, you'd wake up and you hear the hog futures.
I know. That's pork bellies. Pork bellies, what are they selling at today? I need to know. Who needs to know that?
The
I don't
Farm
know.
Report with Pam Yankee here. in
That's
Madison.
right, the Farm Report in Madison. But the thing is, I mean, he would talk, and that was the first time I heard about Art Bell. Was Mom saying, "Oh, you might like that. He talks about all that weird stuff." And I'm like, "Okay, well, I like weird stuff, Mom." And then you just start listening to it, and so that became, his voice became the sound that I went to bed with for years.
Yeah, me
So
too.
I feel like Art lives in my dreams.
Yeah, me too. And in spite of the sometimes disturbing topics that would keep you awake, his voice is very soothing and calm, and I think that's part of what
Yeah.
made people comfortable talking to him
Well-
about these crazy things.
Yeah, definitely. And let's just put it this way, that he was there for many people in the night. Like if you're a night owl, you might have some other issues going on. You might be grieving, you might be in pain, you might be chronically ill. And he was there for those people. And he also allowed you to talk about anything. Gave voice to a part of human experience, which is really unfairly marginalized and vilified. The
Well,
paranormal.
sometimes unfairly villainized and marginalized.
Well, okay.
Because half the people that called in an open lines were lying.
Or acting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, that's the thing. But it does not mean that there's no signal to the noise. And that was the beauty of the show. I mean,
He didn't
certainly
have a
there's
screener.
Yeah,
So let's set it up right there that Art
Yeah.
Bell did not have he did not have a call screener. He
So
would
you're
just be
gonna
like,
talk to anybody,
"You're on the line," and that would be it. And then he would have hotlines set up
right?
for
West of the
certain
Rockies.
people. Right, west of the Rockies, east of the
East
Rockies.
of the Rockies.
And then he'd have a hotline set up where, let's say, if you're the Antichrist, if you are the Antichrist, I want you to call in, and there's a special number for the Antichrist. There's a special number for people who used to work at Area 51. There'd be a special number for vampires. So if you were a vampire, I want you to call this number. And
we
Art did-
never ever called. So again, no evidence that we are vampires.
Wait, that's right. We never called the vampire line. I did call the Shadow People episode.
Oh yeah, so let's talk about that. I mean, because so here's the thing. He brought out topics. Yes, it was a nightly trip to Crazy Town. Yes, there were disturbing topics. But I don't know about you. I find it very soothing to, drift off to sleep listening to stories of, satanic sacrifices. I don't know. Just might be just me. I'm like, oh,
He also had a soothing voice, though.
It's like a lullaby.
what did you do to that baby again? Oh, so relaxing.
Yeah, satanic ritual abuse. Put me to sleep. But the thing about Art, though,
Yeah, go ahead.
he had this nice voice. He had the soothing radio voice. He didn't have the morning zoo radio voice.
Yeah, he wasn't a shock jock.
Like he didn't come on. I mean, but the thing is, I'd never heard him when he talked originally about politics. So Coast to Coast AM was originally a traditional kind of political show. It wasn't paranormal topics. It was
Right.
only he got encouraged to take on these paranormal topics because they were having better ratings on the paranormal shows than they were on political shows.
Yeah,
So-
well, I'm sure that he was interested in the topic, and that he rubbed shoulders with people that have come into the news recently, like Bob Bigelow. We'll have to talk about that as well.
Because he was Nevada based, and so's Bob Bigelow.
Right? Yeah, and George Knapp. And,
Right,
all those Area 51 UFO people.
Bob Lazar, Robert
Lazar,
Lear.
yep.
Well, Robert Lear is the guy that takes credit for.
Oh, John Lear.
I'm sorry, John Lear. John Lear is the guy that took credit for changing Coast to Coast AM to a paranormal themed show. Because he was the UFO buff and he knew Art, and he said that he's like, I really this has to be a paranormal show. This is what you can do better than anybody. And I would say 30 years on, or whatever, from when Coast to Coast started, Art did really do it better than anybody. His episodes, because the thing is, we say that he didn't have a call screener. So number one, there was nobody between you and Art. So once you took us all on the trip to Crazy Town, Art knew how to handle the trip too. He knew how to lead you. He knew how to lead the conversation in an interesting direction. And I think that's what's missing from a lot of paranormal talk. That's missing. I tell you, that's a struggle that we have in this show when people start going off on the like the meter starts going off, like we're having a really interesting thing, and then it's all of a sudden you realize the crazy's going in the red, and you're like, oh no, like how do we get crazy back to fun and out of the red?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. He could definitely steer it in the most entertaining way, and he wasn't a yes man either. I mean, he took a lot of these people to task. So I mean, that's interesting too. I mean, he wasn't just a dyed in the wool believer. He was skeptical as well. But like we said, he brought some topics to the fore, like the whole shadow person topic. And I mean, you should tell your shadow person story again, Mike, because I was just so compelled.
We've all heard it a million times.
Well, I don't care. I mean, it's cool because it is connected to Art Bell, right?
Well, we could reference our Shadow People episode.
We could do that, definitely.
But you should tell the story about calling into Art Bell for sure, because how many of us have had that opportunity?
Yeah.
So the thing is, that was the first time I heard anybody talking about Shadow People was Art Bell in 2000. And this is before he retired for the first time. And we'll get into Art's retirements in a second. But now I have my own thing where I saw a shadow person in the summer of 1993. Straight up saw a shadow. 2 other people saw it with me. Had an intense feeling of dread. We were walking through a park and we saw it. And I'll never tell you as I did in episode 65, or when I recounted it to Nick Redfern, and then it was recounted again by the Gentlemen of Mysterious Universe, where they told the whole story in the episode.
Right.
So make sure you check out episode 65 and you'll get that's my official version. That's the one I tell the police. And that's the one I'll tell the judge. But that's my official statement, is in that particular episode. So the thing is, though, I saw a shadow person straight up, and I don't know what it was. There's no explanation for it. Just saw shadows. 2 other people saw it, and it freaked us out for real. And in 2000, I am driving back from Madison to La Crosse, and it's after a show, I think, because it's like 1 o'clock in the morning. And what do we hear but Art Bell's talking about shadow people, and he's like, interesting. If you've seen a shadow person, call this number. And I'm like, oh my God, I've seen a shadow person. I get to call. I finally get to call in. I finally get to tell a story.
Yeah, there's something related that you can share something new.
Now, I just gotten a cell phone not too long before. So I didn't have a car charger yet, I don't think. So I'm sitting there, and it's after 10 o'clock, so I'm not using my anytime minutes, which in 2000 was a big deal. And so I'm on the phone, and I'm like, oh my God, finally. And so I start dialing in, and it's constantly busy. It's busy, for like 10 minutes. But I am undaunted, because this is my chance for glory. I've been listening to Art Bell for years at this point. I've got a real story. I know I'm not going to be lying. I can talk to the man himself, and I can tell the story. And I can be like, this happened to me in 1993. It's not something like I heard it on the radio and then it happened. It's not something I've heard other people have the same kind of experience and then it happened. This was something that I was like, I can do something new to the equation. Yeah. And I'm all excited. I call up. I call. Finally, it rings. And I'm like, holy crap. I'm going to be on the air. And so I'm getting all excited. And I'm passing by Mount La Crosse. No, not Mount La Crosse. I'm passing by Granddad's Bluff in La Crosse, and I'm sitting there. I see the big American flag, and I'm getting all excited. I'm like, that's going to be me climbing to the top of Art Bell Mountain in a second. and what happens is that I finally my phone, or the phone answers, and I'm all ready, and then it runs out of battery.
No.
And I'm like, I was about to be on the line, and it ran out of battery.
No.
So that was my chance to talk to Art Bell, and technology.
And you missed it.
Technology made me lose it. Also, my lack of preparedness, because I had not bought a car charger at that point for my new cell phone. I'd never had a cell phone before. I didn't know how long it was going to last.
Right. Yeah.
I could play Snake on it, though. That was pretty awesome.
Yeah. How long it was going to last.
I probably used
new things.
I probably used the battery playing Snake.
Wait.
That stupid game that sucked.
So you didn't ever actually talk to Art?
No.
Oh, I thought you did.
No,
That's
my whole
just
story
sad.
is that how I was getting there. And then,
Oh, man.
A near
whole-
miss.
right, the whole story is about how it was a swing and a miss.
You dweeb.
I know.
But the thing is,
That's why
Mike,
that story is all set up and, right, no payload.
no delivery. But Mike, your story about the shadow person was really compelling to me because I was such an avid listener to Art Bell, and no, I don't think I ever did call in either. Assuredly not to the vampire line, of course, but
Right.
I was listening for so long, and then when you told me that story, it's like you told me before it. I think you told me before it was on Art Bell, and that was the thing.
Yeah,
that it was
my
like-
story's real.
It was like, here is someone I know and I kind of trust,
Yeah.
sorta. And I was like, I know him. He's my brother, and he had this experience. And then, oh man, then Art Bell comes out with this. This big shadow person thing, and I'm like, oh my god, Mike saw a shadow person.
Yeah.
It was really a thrill to have it work out that way, where you hear about it before it's reported. So it's not, that, like you said, Mike, where you were influenced by anything. It was you having this experience, which is kind of an outlier because, I mean, people talk about ghosts, but you really didn't think of them as just this opaque, like blackness, this silhouette form.
That's because it wasn't a ghost. Or
Yeah.
you say, like, you see like Paul Revere riding around Boston or whatever, like see-through, that's a
Yeah.
ghost. But when you just see a shadow sitting by a sign looking at you, you're like, oh. I mean, there was no explanation for it, and that's the point.
And that was a
and I-
development that, he brought out, that this was another kind of paranormal experience.
And once he brought it up, the calls just started flowing in like crazy. Like so many people had stories and
Yeah,
that
like,
they related to it.
They've
so
been
that
waiting
really,
for that.
yeah, exactly.
Well, and Heidi Hollis, who used to live in Milwaukee and now lives in Chicago.
Yes.
She's got her, I mean, she was on Coast to Coast many times. And so she brought into this entire mythology of the shadow people too, like this war and so
The war between
she's-
good and evil. Yeah.
Right, she's
Mythology
taking-
is the key word there.
right, she's taking it on and developing something further from it that people have from the shadow people. And so I think that's something too, that all of a sudden these people can start communicating their experiences. And the 90s was the time for that because there was also Coast to Coast was one of the first places that had a forum where you could talk about these things on the internet. And people would before there was Reddit, there was Usenet, and there'd be Coast to Coast like message boards where people could talk about topics and they could discuss the things and they could dissect them. And that's what people were doing with John Titor, the time traveler. So we think about these big things, like these mysteries that were brought up on Coast to Coast AM, and then people would dissect them on the internet and they become something to talk about. Shadow people is just one example that we've brought up on this show a million times, but John Titor and his strange time travel, that he belonged to the Time Travel Institute and that he was in the American military in the year 2036. And he came back to the 1990s to try to create a different timeline where the Civil War did not happen. His whole thing was that the Civil War happened again in 2015. And that by the time we get to 2036, America is like busted up into three different sections, and there's been nuclear conflict. And basically he said that he had come from a dystopian future back to the past to try to find ways to change that timeline. And he would post things on the internet, but he also would send faxes into Coast to Coast AM. And that's kind of how the mythology developed, because Art would get these mysterious faxes from John Titor, who was in Tampa, Florida, and he had to go back into the past to save the future. Very Terminator-esque,
Yeah.
right? And he had these predictions, and well, we're 20 years on now,
Yeah.
and let's see which of his predictions came true. None of them.
Oh,
Oh,
dang.
yeah. Well, I'm
Yeah.
glad that we're not, sliced up into three pieces. Although sometimes
Okay,
it
there's
feels
that.
like that.
So he also remember CERN,
Yeah.
the European Organization for Nuclear Research. They developed that gigantic super collider or whatever.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the things they talked about at Art Bell. They're like, if the super collider, something happens to it, can destroy the world. It's going to create a black hole. They said it was going to create a black
suck
hole,
us
and we're all
all
going to get
in.
sucked into it. So there's all this. So John Titor, he was saying that they would discover the basis for time travel, and they would create miniature black holes with their super collider. And so he said that they developed that, and that's how we got back to the past. Was one of the things, but that never happened. In fact, I don't even think that their big collider's working right now. Like they had to go back and take a couple of years to work on it. Also, the Torchwood from Doctor Who, the Torchwood's a spinoff of Doctor Who. They had a whole episode, like a whole radio drama based on that too. That right before that they opened up this collider, everybody was like, "Oh yeah, it's going to destroy the world," and it became like it was reality mixing with fiction. So other things he predicted the U.S. Civil War. The last Olympics would be in 2004. Well, we certainly had Olympics since 2004.
Yeah. We just had one, didn't we?
Yeah.
We had a Winter Olympics.
Yes, we did. And he also claimed that World War III would happen in 2015. And so we're still here.
Yeah. Well, maybe he succeeded in diverting the timeline. Maybe
Or-
he's more effective
there you
than we
go.
thought.
That could be. That could be. So John Titor, but he made all these claims, and then people were dissecting it, and they were taking each of his claims and going through on these internet message boards and discussing them. And that was part of what made Art Bell so fantastic, was that we also now had a place where we could talk about this with other people. And I think that contributed to it. So we think about the 1990s. It really was the victory of the paranormal in mainstream media, because X-Files comes out in 1993, and all of a sudden it's a huge hit. It inspires copies like Baywatch Nights. Which
That's a classic.
David Hasselhoff was hunting the paranormal.
That's right.
And the X Factor Chronicles of the Paranormal. There was a Canadian show based on it.
Right, with Dan Aykroyd.
Dan Aykroyd was the host. And,
But that's based on the real files.
Yeah, wink, wink. And it starred Max Headroom. Max Headroom was the star of, or the guy that played Max Headroom was the star of Chronicles of the Paranormal. You started to have paranormal shows on TV like Sightings.
Yeah, like magazine news shows.
Yeah. And my personal favorite was with Jonathan Frakes. It was on the UPN, and it was called The Paranormal Borderline.
Yes,
You've crossed
remember that?
the paranormal borderline.
I love The Paranormal with Jonathan Frakes.
Oh my God.
And so the 1990s was the paranormal's all over mainstream media, and then Art Bell is at the forefront, getting 9 million listeners. And this was in 1999. I think at its height, Coast to Coast AM would get 12 million listeners. It was the second most popular radio show in the country. It was only behind Rush Limbaugh for the popularity of its radio program.
Right, which is really something when you realize that it's overnight.
Right. This is midnight to 4 o'clock in the morning Central Time. On the East Coast, it's even later. On the West Coast, it starts at 10 o'clock, but those people stay up late anyway. And the thing is, 12 million listeners. Now Coast to Coast averages less than 2 million listeners a night. So you think about at its height, Coast to Coast AM is the second most popular radio program in the country. Everybody's listening to Art Bell.
That's pretty amazing.
All the cool kids. And everybody's talking about the X-Files. Aliens are on T-shirts now. The gray aliens are on people's T-shirts. They're like the alien smoking a joint saying, "Take me to your dealer," or whatever. You see that all over college in 1996. The stupid alien things.
Take me to your dealer.
But that's the kind of thing where the Greys and UFOs, Roswell enters the mainstream. Remember, there's a Roswell TV show based on the idea that there was aliens who had crossbred with obviously good looking, because they were all beautiful on that show. They crossbred with good looking teenagers or whatever in the 1940s. And these kids had alien hybrids in them. But that's the thing. So paranormal enters the mainstream in the 1990s. Art Bell's on the forefront, and the things he was talking about, then people would talk about it during the day and dissect it. And because of the internet, you didn't have to be surrounded by weird people. I mean, we were lucky because we were surrounded by weirdos. So that, but not everybody was. And now the internet has a place where you can talk about that.
Right. Now
And-
we have the support network. And
Right.
that's the one of the beauties of Art Bell, that he was there for the people of the night. He provided that support network if you didn't have one.
Absolutely. And all these things, contributed to kind of making the phenomena what it was, I think. And Art was a rock star. The show Dark Skies even featured him. But Dark Skies is another alien show.
Yeah. Yeah,
And-
he played president of CBS, I think it was.
Yes, William Paley. So he's even on TV and stuff. So this guy isn't just this strange voice in the desert. He's entering the mainstream as well. And the people he interviews Leonard Nimoy, he interviews George Carlin, Dan Aykroyd, all these big celebrities appear on his show as well. In addition to some of the more regular guests. And one of those guests is Whitley Strieber. And, we were just joking about the Greys and the Take Me to Your Dealer and stuff like that. But Whitley Strieber he puts the Greys into the mainstream with his book Communion. And then he becomes a guest on our show, a very regular guest. And they write a book together about the coming global superstorm and the weather apocalypse.
The Quickening.
Yes, the Quickening.
Yeah.
I forgot about the Quickening.
And Whitley had a spin-off show for a while as well.
Dreamland.
Dreamland. That's
Yeah.
right. And you could listen to that, and then you could listen to Dreamland, and then Whitley still has the website Unknown Country. Although I haven't listened to his podcast lately, I wonder if that's still going.
But Whitley Strieber, then, he's with Art Bell too, and so Art's like in the center of this paranormal maelstrom. He always finds himself in the middle of it. And that's one of the reasons that he made such a believable voice, because he seemed to work with all these people who were paranormal experts. But he did it in a way with, like you said before, I think a very important point is that he wasn't a yes man. He listened to the entire thing. He would sometimes challenge, but he didn't act like he believed every single thing. And so we talk about Whitley Strieber, and we've talked about him 1,000 times. We have to talk about some of his other guests that you'd listen to, and I always loved with Father Malachi Martin.
Yeah. So
Art show.
and then for Christmas one year, you got me his book Hostage to the Devil.
Yes.
And and he had I mentioned Satanist before. I remember him having a woman who called herself Harlot on, who was given to the devil when she was a baby. Like she was born into satanic worship. So that was interesting, like hearing like her perspective. And then Father Malachi Martin.
Was she born into actual Satan worship, or was she just born into like Anton LaVey Satan or Marilyn Manson style Satanism?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, she said that, she was a real Satanist, but of course, his show was for entertainment purposes. You can't really ever determine if someone's really a Satanist. But, she talked about, horrible rites that they performed. And then I fell asleep, so I don't know the rest.
Oh, it was all these horrible, scary things.
Oh, yeah, that's the stuff. And then the snoring.
But Father Malachi would come on, and when you talk about hardcore Catholic, like Father Malachi was like your he was angry Catholic priest that Vatican II ever happened. He'd come on and he would just talk about the new Catholic Church like they're all going to hell. He just was such an interesting character, because Father Malachi was all into the exorcism, all into fighting the devil. He believed the devil was everywhere.
Yeah. And that there were people that were perfectly possessed, as he would put it. That there were people who wanted to be possessed. I mean, this was their way to power, and that they you would never know that they're possessed because this is what they want. They weren't fighting it.
So they weren't just hostage to the devil. They were the devil.
Compliant, bringing it
Okay.
forth into meat space, into our
All right.
reality.
So, I mean, Father Malachi talking about and that was my first experience where people were actually talking about exorcisms like it was a real thing.
Yeah.
I remember asking our priest, Father Bob or whatever, I'm like, you ever had to do an exorcism? And he's like, what? And remember, Father Bob's like drinking at the time. Like he's talking like, Father, he'd have like a beer and a smoke and be like, what? No, he's like, those people are just crazy.
He didn't say that, did he?
Yeah,
Did
no,
he say
Father
that?
Bob, because I asked him about that, because I asked him about two things, but before you get confirmed, you have a conversation with the priest. And I'm like, well, what about...
You used it to full advantage.
Yeah. Well,
I want to talk about exorcism and what was the other?
Might as well.
and I also wanted to talk about, I'm like, what about hell, Father Bob? Like Buddhists, like, what if they're good? Buddhists can be good. They still go to hell? He's like, nah, they go to heaven too. As long as you're a good person, they're fine.
Aw.
And then I'm like, all right. And what about, he's like, nah, people, like the devil's not possessing people. Those people are just crazy and they need psychological help. Now, Father Bob's probably going to get in trouble.
Yeah,
I think
because
Father
that
ratted
goes
him out.
that goes against the Pope.
Right. Malachi Martin would be like, get him out of the priesthood right now.
And the Pope even is like, the devil's real.
But does the Pope
Yeah.
have to deal with little kids coming up and being like, what happens to the other good people? They don't go to heaven?
Well, you know this new cool fancy, like he's like
yeah.
the new cool liberal Pope and stuff.
Yeah,
like that.
he'd be like, yeah, everybody goes to heaven.
right.
That's
He's
I
what
like how,
I'm
Mike,
feeling.
when you talk about him, you look like Ricky Martin or something, the way your shoulders
he's
start moving.
He's like, hey, I'm the new cool Pope. I kiss boys. You know, like he's down. You know, he's whatever he's down with everything. He's like, you're divorced? I don't care. Come to church, baby.
I know, but he's still walking the party line about the devil. He's like, the
true.
devil's real. Yes, I'm cool, but the devil's real.
Devil
It's
gonna
not a
get you,
joke.
baby. Devil gonna get you.
It's no joke. But yeah, Father Malachi Martin and his perfectly possessed thing. I
That was the
remember.
first time I ever heard a priest actually, or somebody, you know, who had some relationship with the church actually talk about the devil like he was a real character
right.
and not, you know, not just some figment of our imagination. Because the church after The Exorcist was trying to
downplay.
downplay the fact that we're kind of, you know, we're doing this crap to kids and stuff like that.
Yeah, don't talk about it. Yeah, because you know, you and I have you know, we've both researched local exorcisms, and yeah, that's really the thing where priests would come forward in newspaper articles and be like, no, it's not like that. That guy was crazy.
Yeah, please.
You know, you don't need to perform that many exorcisms. You know, they really were trying to downplay it, but it has been a major part of the Catholic Church, and it still is. And that's something that you know, people should acknowledge, that it is a very important part of the Roman Catholic faith.
So what are some of your other favorite guests? Like Father Malachi Martin, he was entertaining. The first couple times that Richard Hoagland was on, I enjoyed that. Because I'm like, oh, this guy's interesting. But then he started getting way too in the face on Mars.
Yeah.
He downplays that he had a picture with, like, he's got, like, some commendation from the first President Bush. And so he uses that to be like, oh, yeah, well, you know, I'm official and everything. I met the
Right,
president.
Yeah, I can't go there with Hoagland, but I want to share about John Greenwald, because he was this 15-year-old kid who creates this site. You know, this back in 1996. You know, so he's old like all of us now. But you know, in 1996, he's a high school kid, 15 years old. He loves the X-Files, and he's like, I'm not just gonna love the X-Files. I'm gonna do something about it. He's, you know, that whole "the truth is out there" thing. I mean, that was his call to action, and so he's like, "The truth is out there. I'm finding it." So he has devoted his life, and is still doing it today, to put out freedom of information requests, and we all can do it, but usually we don't. We can ask for information from the government about what the heck is really going on. and you might have to wait years. I mean, some of his requests he's had to wait, like a decade for or more.
Right.
But he's in this for the long haul. So he was on Art Bell when he was 17 years old.
Oh, wow.
And so he's got the site still today. You can go, and he has just I don't know how many documents now, but just millions at least. And he on April 14th, he posted on his Black Vault page. This is his quote: "I appeared on Art Bell's show quite a few times, and to say he was a legend is an understatement. I have him to thank for giving a 17-year-old his big break in radio many years ago, and based on that interview, Whitley Strieber for my big break in television. The rest is Black Vault history. I never forgot the belief that this man had in me to bring a teenager onto his show to talk to millions. Art will be sorely missed."
Well, yeah, the Black Vault is something we've talked about before because that's a great place that you guys can go to find freedom of information documents and stuff. And I mean, he started careers. That's a good way to put it. Like he started careers. He brought people to the forefront. Think about that guy Jerome Corsi, who now he mostly does InfoWars stuff. He's an InfoWars. Alex Jones. Speaking of InfoWars, like that's where Alex Jones, his conspiracies, his breaking into the Bilderberg group and everything like that, like that all came from these late night radio shows. And since then, they've turned that into a career for themselves, whether for good or ilk, depends on, probably where you stand. But that's the thing, that Art Bell's show built careers. And that's part of what made him so awesome. That's part of why we love it. And speaking of freedom of information, this is in the See You on the Other Side podcast newsletter that just came out yesterday. Now, if you guys do not belong to the See You on the Other Side podcast email list, you might want to check it out because this is a newsletter you'll enjoy because we have 5 great paranormal stories every week. Government accidentally sends file on, quote, remote mind control, unquote, methods to journalist doing a Freedom of Information Act.
Whoa.
So this week, they accidentally sent along on this completely different Freedom of Information Act request, which was about white supremacist groups, Homeland Security. That's where he was looking for. Instead, he receives a file on psychoelectric weapons that have electromagnetic effects on the human body. Included are elements of mind control, controlling dreams, this whole thing on psychoelectric weapon effects that the government was working on, at least at some point, maybe not recently, but that gets accidentally sent in a Freedom of Information Act request. So that's why things like the Black Vault are fun to look through because you never know what you're going to find. And also, that's why you should be subscribed to the See You on the Other Side podcast newsletter, because that's the kind of stuff that you're going to hear about every single week. So we're talking about some of our favorite arts guests. I mean, he introduced me to the mind of Michio Kaku, who I love.
Yes.
And he's also a real science. And that's fun when you talk to Brian Greene or Michio Kaku, and you talk to, it's fun to get the crazy stuff in there. But it's always fun that he'd be able to also keep up with guys who are real scientists and physicists who are working on this, who like to talk about the theoretical aspect and the science fiction aspect, as well as the hard science aspect. That was always one of my favorites when Michio Kaku would be on there. It's also where first time I ever heard Uri Geller was on our show.
That was a cool episode because he was telling everybody to take their broken watches and radios and things, and then he'd have you set them right in front of your radio, and then he did the whole work thing, and then people would call in and say, "Oh my gosh, it's amazing, it's a miracle." I loved that episode. I'm sure there were several of them, actually. I'm sure he was a recurring guest, but I definitely remember listening to that live.
Right, me too. And that was you could, Wendy, it might have been when we were living in the same house. You could probably hear it coming out of our rooms in the middle of the night. We'd have the radios on. But the thing is, he'd introduce you to those people, and Uri Geller, you realize how charismatic of a speaker and stuff he is, that you'd be like, oh man, I kind of believe it too. He's over the radio, and I think he's bending a spoon.
Right.
I believe him.
It's very convincing.
That was also Coast to Coast AM under Art was the first place they'd have these massive thinking experiments or prayers and stuff like that. They'd have these whole groups work together to try to use their mind bullets to make changes in the world and experiments. And Art's show was the first place that really happened.
That was always cool.
So that was the fun part, is that they developed stuff that just had never been seen before and never been heard before. And that's why we loved it. Now, at the same time, this is where Art could get into trouble because he had such a massive influence, because he talked about these topics that nobody else was talking about. He also talked about some things that would have an effect on people. Allison, in our interview with Nick Redfern, you talk about that you had listened to Coast the same weekend that those girls stabbed the girl in the Slender Man.
Yeah, so it was not just the same weekend. It was the early morning hours of that day. So, and I was listening to it that day later in the afternoon because I'm a subscriber. So, I don't always listen to it in the middle of the night.
On demand.
But yeah, I listen to it on demand instead. And so, but I was keeping up current with it, and, I'm cleaning the kitchen, and they're talking about, Slender Man, this fictional internet character. Could it become a reality, and how that might happen? And, people are putting so much of their intention into it. And geez, why can't we get people to put their intentions into stuff like Earth Day? I don't know. But anyway, people are manifesting the idea that they're manifesting the Slender Man. And then I go to the next room, turn on the news, and what do I hear about? But the stabbing that has just happened. So it was
that's freaky,
right?
Really startling.
Well, that's the thing. And so this happened. No, this was in 2014. So this wasn't back in the Art Bell times,
right?
But
this was
let's
later.
go back. Let's go back to the Art Bell times. Now, thank God, nobody died in that incident. But here's something where they did, and we had a whole episode on Heaven's Gate when the 20th anniversary happened last year,
right?
And we talked about, so the Heaven's Gate cult, just real quick, if you aren't familiar, these are people who believe that aliens were going to come down and they were going to join up with the aliens and go on to this next life that would be beautiful and perfect and all of that. And in the beginning, it was physical. It was that the aliens were actually going to come down and they were going to jump on the spaceship and join them. But in the end, after the cult leader's partner died, he started getting more and more into that they have to die too to be able to go on to the other side. Well, 1997, the Hale-Bopp comet is going to come by, and we're going to be able to see it on Earth. And this astronomer calls up the Art Bell show and says he's got a photograph. His name was Chuck Schramek, and Chuck was an amateur astronomer from Houston. He says he's got a photograph that appears to show a large object behind the comet. And he speculated that object would be about 4 times the size of the Earth. The whole idea was that this comet had a companion UFO. And then somebody comes on, and he's got some remote viewers. He comes on Art Bell's show, and he says, "Oh yeah, this object companion. My remote viewers have said that it's full of aliens." All right. So now we have a comet coming through, and the comet actually is coming through. We've got a mysterious object next to the comet, and we've got people saying that they're aliens. Well, the Heaven's Gate cult uses that information directly from the Coast to Coast show to say that these are the aliens that they're coming to pick us up. This is our ride. And to get on that ride.
Oh boy.
And to get on that ride, we all got to die.
Right.
And so they killed themselves. And I mean, you can go back to that episode and we give you in depth on, how that all happened. It was a tragedy. It was sad. And now it's like a pop culture punchline when people think about the Nike shoes that they all wore. But at the same time, a couple dozen people lost their lives. A horrible thing. Very,
yeah, it's so sad.
And so, there's a whole article from the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal, their Skeptical Inquirer magazine, goes into depth, and they try to paint some of that blame on Art's show. That's that kind of journalism, that kind of journalism where you're not challenging people enough, or letting people go off on these imaginary tangents of aliens in this companion object. People used that to hurt other people. Now, Art, he didn't feel like his responsibility. He said, I'm not going to stop presenting my material because there are unstable people. That's what the First Amendment is all about.
Yeah.
And that is, it's not his fault. He's
Absolutely
presenting an
not.
interesting topic.
Yeah.
And he's saying that, like, look, I can't help at the fact that these people already were part of a UFO cult. Is he supposed to not report on something that he thinks is interesting? And that's just Heaven's Gate.
Yeah, and but they could, people can go off on anything. It's could have been the other way that somebody hears that they're here and is like, hey, we got to clean up this house. Figuratively,
Right.
we've got to get together and care about our environment, care about each other. I mean, they could have gone that way with it too. I mean,
Sure.
It's just a possibility that there could have been an alien ship behind Hale Bopp. Hey,
But, I mean, but the
what you
hippies
do
are
with that
dead.
information's up to you. What was that?
I said, but the hippies are dead. So what we're left with is alien cults that kill themselves. But one thing that I thought was a little irresponsible, as much as I loved Art Bell, was the coverage of Y2K.
Oh, yeah,
I mean-
that was almost panic inciting.
let's not forget about Y2K, because that was something that reasonable people thought could be a real issue. Now,
well,
for you guys in the present here, you kids listening to the show, you don't understand that there was an entire panic that went around for the fact that we did not use 4-digit dating at the end of the 20th century. So 12/31/1999 was written out on computers as 12/31/99. And when it would turn over to 01/01/00, computers would freak out because they wouldn't realize it was the year 2000. They would think that it was 1900 or 00, and they would not be able to figure out what would happen when their dates would turn to 00. And so what were some of the things that people were saying was going to happen with Y2K?
Oh, the power grid was going to go
fall
down.
out of the sky.
I love it. The panic starts all at once. Wendy's like, the power's going to go down. I was like, satellites are falling from the sky.
Yeah.
And
They made a whole-
airlines.
Yeah, like planes.
Basically Armageddon. But it was so why do you think that was irresponsible? I mean, I know he was just talking about it, but the truth is people really didn't know what was going to happen. So, he was bringing forth all the
didn't.
possibilities of, I guess, the worst case scenarios maybe. But I don't know. At that time, it was a curiosity that nobody really did know what was going to happen.
Oh yeah, and I at the time was an internet professional, so I had people that worked with me that someone that worked with me was studying programming at MSOE, and she said that that's the Milwaukee School of Engineering, and she said, hey, one of my professors, this was way before Y2K, is this was like 1995 or 1996 or something like that, and she had come to me and said, hey, one of my professors is saying, there's an opportunity going on right now that you should get in on, which is an opportunity for coders to, get in on this mad scramble to correct these problems with the upcoming Y2K. So it was a thing that, they were talking about at the Milwaukee School of Engineering. So it was a thing that was in the minds of programmers at the time.
Well, the reason I think it was kind of irresponsible is that he hedged his bets a little bit. Here's an interview with the Los Angeles Times in December 27th, 1999. And he's just like, well, is the big one coming that night? He's like, no, I don't necessarily believe that. What I do expect is the possibility of power problems as midnight approaches. There are hundreds of thousands of embedded chips, and nobody knows what the hell is going to happen with those. This isn't software. These are actual computer chips and power companies switching equipment, and the power companies have not done a lot of remediation. And then he goes, power is what pumps your water. When you don't have water, you can't flush a toilet. And if the power goes off, I think people are not going to regard that so well. I'm more concerned about people, about the social reaction, than I am about machines. They're like, do you mean riots? They're not unknown, are they? And people seem to take any advantage of any opportunity to go collect their favorite color TV. And so I'm not, but what I mean is he hedged his bets in the way that that danger made the whole topic of Y2K very scintillating. But at the same time, there was a panic element associated with it. And so there is a line when you are talking about these things between the scintillation and the titillation of, is there going to be a riot? That's that whole Family Guy, the first episode of Family Guy is Y2K and the world ends. You know, the idea is that once Y2K happens, Peter's proven right. He's in a bunker, but the rest of the world explodes. And there was a mini series too. Why? Like an NBC movie of the week. Y2K. You know, that whole thing, the disaster film about what's going to happen when the power grid goes out on the West Coast and everybody starts freaking out and killing each other like it's 1992 Los Angeles. And so I do think they used that to get people to listen. Oh, it's a Y2K. I know I listened because I'm thinking, oh man, what happens in Madison if it all goes out? It ended up being 2000. By the time it was midnight, I've been too drunk. I'd have been the first guy killed anyway. You know, I enjoyed too many champagne toasts before the New Year, so I'd have been. If we'd had riots in Madison, it'd been my body that'd been dragging through the streets.
Yeah, you're like, oh, I really should have my wits about me. Oh, but there's beer.
Refill? Yes, please.
Yeah. Hey, at least I go out in a good mood. Like if the nukes, Y2K caused the nukes to go off. But that's the thing. I mean, but those are the things that we were talking about. And it was, apocalypse was on the lips.
Yeah.
Apocalypse.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, plural.
Hey, thank you. I'll be here for at least another 10 minutes.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, he was just looking at what was coming. I mean, I don't think that he knew if it was going to be devastation or not. I mean,
I'm not casting any blame on the guy. I just mean the fact is all that we talk about, the good parts of this paranormal discussion and the way these things open people's minds, and also how paranormal was in the mainstream in the 1990s and it had good parts and bad parts.
And how dangerous it is to open people's minds.
Right.
You know, one
Can be.
one thing that comes to mind is Orson Welles and what happened in the aftermath of what he did.
The War of the Worlds broadcast in 1938. People freaked out, and they called the police, and they really thought that the Martians were coming for New Jersey. Like the Martians are going to come for New Jersey first.
The War of the Worlds.
Yeah. Well, I want to make sure that we talk about a certain topic, and I think you guys should relate to this one well. And I'm curious if it influenced you as historical haunting experts. Whenever Art would have the Ghost to Ghost AM specials, from time to time, he would just flat out say, okay, next week, this date, the topic is going to be ghost stories, and it would just be open lines and people calling in with their best and worst hauntings and personal stories of things that they've experienced. So did you guys like that as much as I did? Because that was always one of my favorite topics.
Absolutely. Every Halloween Ghost to Ghost.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was my favorite.
And he really, for those people calling in, like they had such compelling ghost stories.
Yeah, I get goosebumps just thinking about it right now. Because I remember just laying in bed and listening to that in the dark, and just people calling in with the freakiest, scariest things.
That was must listen. and as I was saying, this must listen material comes from the fact that here is a part of human experience that has been a real integral part of our evolution for millennia. And it with our mechanist and materialist reductionist worldview, it's been kicked to the curb. And that just leaves people in a difficult position because weird stuff is happening. And what are you supposed to do?
And who will listen to me about it?
Right? That's the only place you can go with it. So he gave people a forum for that. And,
he did. And before that, he was given the Carl Sagan Snuffed Candle Award.
Oh, really?
Yeah. In like 1998, he was given the Carl Sagan Snuffed Candle, and that's whole Carl Sagan as science as the candle in the dark. Now Carl Sagan was billions and billions percent against any claims of the paranormal, demonic activity.
Demon haunted world. Yeah, that was his book.
And while we talk about the balance between the scintillating aspect of this and the responsible of it, I mean, that's one of the reasons that you can't go too far in either direction. If you go too atheist in it, then you discount people's experiences. But if you go too spiritual, then you never actually build a bridge. You're like, well, God will get you across. No, sometimes you got to build a bridge.
Yeah, so, I mean, I just want to interject here. We recently had Gary Lockman on the program, and he writes about something he calls cosmic consciousness, which is balancing those two aspects, these essential aspects of humanity. And that, he thinks, this cosmic consciousness has surfaced, many times, throughout our evolution in certain people, and that we're all working towards this, like that balancing act. And then you can really see the world for what it is if you hold both of those things together simultaneously, even though they seem to be opposed. Then you'll really see what the world's all about.
And I think that's a great way to put it, in the idea that we need to have a little bit of both. You need to have a little bit of spookiness to go along with your daily dose of reality, because reality sometimes is boring, and spooky makes it fun.
Yeah, and spooky is relevant too. Right. I mean, I'm glad that Art Bell, and I wish I would have known, like, what was his reaction to those New York Times articles that came out in December of this year about UFO investigation still going on in the government. I wonder, like, what was he thinking about that? I'm glad he lived to see it.
I'm glad that Art he gave us so much of himself. And the thing is, he wasn't a man that was opposed to a little mystery in his life, too. Remember when Art would have these mysterious retirements, and he had several mysterious retirements in his career.
Unannounced.
Yeah, I mean, his first one had to deal with his son being sexually assaulted, and then having some suicidal thoughts, and that's a very tragic and scary one. His son was sexually assaulted by his gym teacher who had HIV, and then his son started, like Art talks in its interview, he talks about how he was writing poetry about death, giving away all his possessions, and he had to deal with his son, going through that, and then another radio host in Nevada accuses Art of child molestation.
What?
Yeah, and so this is in the late 90s. So Art's getting death threats because people are saying that he's a child molester, and then his son is going through this stuff. And so Art has serious personal issues that create his first retirement. And he leaves coast to coast to a guy named Jason Segel, who did an okay job, but he was no Art Bell. And then Art comes back for a couple years, and then he retires again. And then he's got his show on Sirius XM radio after that. And then he starts saying that he hears gunshots around his property, and that he's investigating things that he shouldn't. And so for the safety of his family, he has to retire again. So in addition to talking about these topics, Art in his later years ends up becoming a target himself, becoming a topic himself of mystery.
Yeah.
And so I always thought it was interesting that this guy who would talk about topics that you weren't supposed to be able to talk about, eventually himself feels that he has to be forced off the air. Yeah,
and that's a sobering conclusion, but it's kind of in a narrative. If this was a narrative, what you'd expect, that when you start looking into the unknown, at some point it looks back.
That's right. That's the the whole Nietzsche, if you stare into the abyss, be careful because the abyss might stare back. And, well, Nietzsche himself was dealing with his own psychological issues at the time. But that's the thing. But Art dared to stare into the abyss. And, the most famous call, and speaking of being forced off the air, his most famous call is when he had his line for people that worked at Area 51. He's like, if you work at or used to work at Area 51, special hotline for you.
Yeah, this was in 1997, the what's become known as the frantic caller from Area 51. And so my husband and I, this was a Saturday night, we were listening to Art Bell and, falling asleep. And I thought we had fallen asleep, but then, Scott wakes up a little bit, and then, I wake up a little bit, and we're listening, and then this guy comes on, and he's super believable. This caller sounded like he was in a panic, and he's like, oh no, they're going to triangulate on my position, and Art's like, so droll about it, he's like, well, give us something quick. And he's really like breaking down and crying and saying, I used to work at Area 51, and the government, they know what's happening. What we call aliens are really interdimensional beings, and they want to eliminate like 3/4 of the population.
Right,
and
the population centers.
Let it happen because the few that are left behind will be easier to control. And then the whole show goes off the air.
Yeah, it goes off.
Apparently, like the network lost satellite lock or something like that. And then suddenly we have the best of Art Bell playing, for several minutes afterward until they're able to get back with the satellite and get him back on the air. So that was
and Art comes back and he's like, this has never happened before.
Yeah, that was well orchestrated. That was really crazy. And then so Scott and I are like, oh, that's up. That's it. We're up for the
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, that call is so famous. First of all, it's September 11th, 1997.
Oh, really?
So yeah. So that happens, and then it's such a famous call. It's replayed a bunch of times in the best of Art Bell. Like, that's everybody's favorite because it's a pants crapper. Like that is the scariest call. And I don't know if I heard it that night or I heard it like when it was replayed a couple days later. But Art comes back. He's like, yeah, we've never lost satellite before. That was the first time that ever happened. And then there's people saying that, when I'm looking up the best of Art Bell and people are talking about it, there's a guy calls in a couple weeks later, says, hey, what a good joke, right? I really did that well. Like somebody calls and tries to take credit for it.
Oh man.
Tries to say that, oh yeah, that was me, and what a good hoax. Or was it the
right,
government?
exactly.
That was an FBI agent calling in saying, oh, we gotta clear this up. But then Tool uses that in one of their songs. They use some of his Freaking Out from their Lateralis album that came out in 2001. They got a song called Fayap de Olad, means voice of God in Enochian. Enochian, a language developed by Edward Kelly in the 16th century.
John D.
Yep. And said this language had been revealed to him by the angels. So Tool uses a cool, like, paranormal language for the name of one of their songs, and they integrate this stuff right into that track. And that, that was always a cool thing, that people thought that the guys from Tool had made that up, in their secret track or whatever. But actually what happened, they used that that radio call in there. But that, besides being on the best of Art Bell, fast forward to September of 2017, and people in California, a Thursday morning, they're just watching their regular TV in Orange County, Spectrum and Cox cable users. All of a sudden, there's an emergency alert broadcast to them. So somebody gets in on the emergency alert system September of 2017. This is just last year, not even 6 months ago, or right around 6 months ago. The video broadcast says, got a terrified voice saying, the space program made contact with, they're not what they claim to be. They have infiltrated a lot of aspects of the military establishment, particularly Area 51. The disasters that are coming, the military, the government knows about them. broadcast over cable with the emergency broadcast alert last
Holy
September.
cow.
So there's a different voice jumps on and says extremely violent times will come. And people are freaking out that this is their emergency broadcast system. And only later on did they realize that people that somebody had broken into the emergency broadcast system, had taken a couple of different broadcasts, including this original Art Bell phone call, mixed it with this Christian radio program called Insight for Living with Chuck Swindoll, and took this whole about extremely violent times will come and things like that, mashed it together, and broadcast it as an emergency broadcast in Southern California.
Wow, was that person apprehended yet?
No, they don't know who did it.
Wow, that's amazing stuff.
Yeah, and so it makes the Orange County Register. It makes a few blogs like Gizmodo. Midnight in the Desert talks about it. Obviously, Heather Wade talks about it because she is the successor to Art Bell and his Midnight in the Desert program.
Yeah.
And so that famous call gets reused over, and it's so good that 21 years later, people are still using it to scare the crap out of people in pranks.
And I didn't know it was on September 11th, and that actually was a Thursday. So I must have had a sleepless,
at work
Friday. Yeah, hopefully I took that day off.
So, so that was Art's most famous call, and it was such a brilliant piece of radio. Whether it was a hoax or not, at the time I thought it was real. At the time I was like, oh God, but satellite uplink, the government, man. So we all freaked out a little bit just over that. So,
absolutely.
Anyway, thank you for joining us today on this memory of Art Bell. And it's nice to talk about somebody who had such an influence over all of us. We'll miss him. And so, Art, you're gone too soon. 72 makes me sad because we'll never get to have you on the program, which is always a dream.
Yeah, and I just want to interject too that I was fortunate enough though to be on Midnight in the Desert in November of this last year, 2017. So I wasn't on with Art himself, but I felt like maybe he's listening. I was on with Heather Wade, and just the bumper music coming through. It was the same bumpers that Art used to use. When you're coming back to the guest, you would hear like a thunderclap.
That's cool.
And I was like, oh my God, like just hearing the bumpers like put me back into that space. I forgot a lot of these things, but then they come right back to you when you're in that space. All the things that he did and how meaningful it was to so many of us, started flooding back, when I was on, and just, some crazy stuff too, like that Phaedra song. So just some crazy songs, some crazy ideas, and just a place for all of us. That's what he did, and he made this area of human experience, which is really difficult for some of us to think about. He made it more accessible, and he made it something that people could talk about and discuss. And for that we owe him a debt of gratitude. So I really appreciate that you thought of having this tribute to him. I think it's really something that's important.
Well, goodbye, Art. Thank you for the hundreds, if not thousands of hours of entertainment that you've given us over the years. We sure appreciate that. And we'll always have those nice memories of long, scary drives to your voice. So the song this week is actually based on his Open Line Fridays. Open Line Fridays were a mixed bag. They still are, because I still do my Coast to Coast AM. But Open Line Fridays could be a mixed bag. Sometimes you would get some incredible stories. Sometimes you get the scariest stuff you ever heard. And sometimes it would just be playing a game of whack-a-mole. And so who could be the craziest. And so the song this week is dedicated to the memory Art Bell and those wonderful Open Line Fridays he used to have. This is called On the Line.
Somewhere sits there with the microphone in his hand. Strange lights in the distance and mystery on the lips. Destination unknown, we're going live without a script. And who knows what crazy things we'll hear today. It don't matter if you're a liar or an angel or a vampire. Well, you're preaching to the choir in the dark of the night. Just don't waste our time when you're on the line. Maybe you're ex-CIA, maybe you worked at 51. We never knew who would call in, all we knew is it'd be fun. And somewhere in the desert, there's still a voice going through the night. And as the clock strikes 12, you can almost hear west of the Rockies, you're on the line. And who knows what crazy things we'll hear today. It don't matter if you're a liar or an angel or a vampire. Well, you're preaching to the choir in the dark of the night. And it don't matter if you're a liar or an angel or a vampire. Well, you're preaching to the choir in the dark of the night. Just don't waste our time when you're on the line. When you're on the line. When you're on the line. When you're on the line.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. You can find us online at OtherSidePodcast.com. Until next time, see you on the other side.
But wait.
What? Wait, what?
Before we go, we got to say thank you to our Patreon community, particularly Dr. Ned.
Yes, thank you so much. All of you.
You guys are the ones that keep us going every single week, which is why we want to hang out with you this week.
Yay. Can't wait.
So that'll be Wednesday at 7 p.m. Central Time. Let's all hang out and let's talk about weird stuff for the evening. Just like Art used to talk to people, we can do that too.
Yeah, and you can share your favorite Art Bell memories or episodes that you heard and anything else that you think of fondly or not fondly, I guess.
All right. And you can just have a conversation. So what we like to do, if you guys aren't part of our Patreon community, we like to talk to everybody who supports us in person over the internet. Every month we have a hangout where we go on Google and we just sit around and we shoot the business as we talk about paranormal stuff and just lives and things like that. And so it's a really nice community, and we'd love to see you guys being a part of it at OtherSidePodcast.com/donate is where you can learn more about it.
And so members of our community, just a quick reminder that will be happening on Wednesday, April 25th at 7 p.m. Central Time. So look out for the Google Plus invite for that.
All right. So remember, OtherSidePodcast.com/donate.
Have a great week.
All these horrible, scary things.